The dark ships came from the void between stars, massive and silent, like floating mountains of black metal. They appeared first over Avian Prime, where the proud bird people had built their crystal cities high in the clouds. The Averans watched from their towers as the alien vessels blocked out their twin suns, casting shadows across their world for the first time in recorded history. The message came in every language, broadcast directly into the minds of every living being on the planet. The voice was cold and ancient, speaking words that had been spoken to 1,000 worlds before. We are the Dominion. You will surrender all weapons, all technology, all resistance. You will serve us in the mines and factories of our empire. You will live, but only as our servants. You have one solar rotation to decide. The Averan High Council met in emergency session. Their generals spoke of their mighty air fleets, their plasma cannons that could split mountains, their warriors, who had never known defeat. But when the Dominion ships demonstrated their power by turning one of Avian's moons to dust with a single beam of light, the discussion ended quickly. The Averans folded their wings and surrendered before the sun set. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. On Korath, the reptilian warriors who had conquered 3 star systems in living memory watched their greatest battleships crumble like paper against Dominion weapons. Their war chief, who had led armies across a dozen worlds, knelt in the dust of his burned capital and offered his people's service. The Dominion accepted with the same cold indifference they showed to all who submitted. The crystal beings of Lumina tried to negotiate, their vast computational minds calculating millions of possible outcomes. They offered technology, knowledge, even their sacred memory crystals that held the wisdom of ages. The Dominion listened to their proposals for exactly 1 minute before repeating their original terms. The Lumina dimmed their lights in surrender, their crystalline forms growing dark with defeat. World after world fell to the same pattern. The Dominion would arrive, demonstrate their overwhelming power, and wait for the inevitable surrender. Some species tried to hide, others attempted to bargain, a few even managed brief resistance. But in the end, they all chose survival over freedom. The galaxy learned to kneel. The Dominion forces were ancient beyond measure, their technology refined by conquests spanning millions of years. Their ships were powered by captured stars, their weapons could crack planets, and their armies were led by beings who had crushed the spirits of countless civilizations. They ruled not through mere force, but through the complete destruction of hope. They made resistance seem impossible, surrender inevitable. Admiral Marcus Ross stood on the bridge of the Terran Defense Force flagship watching the enemy fleet approach Earth. The Dominion had sent their standard conquest force, the same ships that had broken the will of 100 worlds. Through the viewports, he could see the massive dark vessels moving with mechanical precision, their hulls absorbing light like holes in space itself. "Sir, we're receiving their transmission," reported Lieutenant Davis from the communications station. The young officer's voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly as he worked his controls. Around the bridge, the crew waited in tense silence. They all knew what was coming. The message filled the air with its cold certainty. The same words that had been spoken to every other species, the same ultimatum that had never been refused. Submit or die, serve or be destroyed. The choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Admiral Ross listened to the entire message without speaking, his weathered face showing no emotion. Behind him, his officers waited for orders. In the distance, Earth turned slowly in space, blue and green and beautiful, home to 8 billion souls who had never bowed to any master. "Open a channel," Ross commanded. "All frequencies, maximum broadcast power. I want every ship in their fleet to hear this, and I want every world in the galaxy to know what we choose." The communications officer nodded and activated the transmitters. Across the solar system, on every ship and station and settlement, humans heard their admiral's words. More importantly, the Dominion heard them too, along with the countless enslaved species who monitored the galaxy's communications in secret. "To the Dominion fleet," Ross began, his voice calm and clear. "You have made your offer. You have shown us your power. You have given us your terms. We have considered them carefully, and we have reached our decision. We decline your offer. We will not surrender our weapons, our technology, or our freedom. We will not serve in your mines or factories. We will not kneel. Instead, we choose to fight. We choose war. Come and take our world if you can, but know that we will make you. Pay for every inch of ground, every drop of water, every breath of air. We are human, and we do not surrender. The silence that followed was profound. Across the galaxy, enslaved species listened in stunned disbelief. The Avirans lifted their heads in their crystal cities. The Koriths gripped their ceremonial weapons. Tighter, the lumina pulsed with light they had not shown since their surrender. For the first time in generations, the galaxy heard the word no spoken to the Dominion. The Dominion High Command was equally stunned. In their vast experience, no species had ever chosen extinction over servitude. Their databases contained the surrender records of 10,000 worlds, but nothing like this. They checked their instruments, certain there had been some mistake. Perhaps the humans had not understood the message. Perhaps their translation systems had failed. But the human admiral continued speaking, his words broadcast across every frequency. We know we may lose. We know you may destroy our world. But we would rather die free than live as slaves. We would rather see our cities burn than see our children in chains. This is our choice, and we will live or die by it. The Dominion fleet began to move, their engines creating ripples in space itself. They had never been forced to follow through on their threats before, but the humans had made their choice. Soon the Dominion commanders thought Earth would be just another cautionary tale, another dead world to remind the galaxy of the price of resistance. But something had changed in the galaxy that day. The word no had been spoken, and once spoken, it could not be unspoken. The Dominion had ruled through fear and despair, but the humans had shown that courage still existed in the universe. They had reminded the galaxy that some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed hopeless. The war was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first Dominion ships entered, Earth's outer defenses expecting the same quick victory they had achieved on countless other worlds. They had faced the crystal weapons of Lumina, the plasma cannons of the Avirans, and the fusion bombs of the Koriths. Human technology seemed primitive by comparison, their ships small and crude. Their weapons simple, kinetic projectiles, and nuclear warheads. The Dominion fleet commander, being known only as Prime Executor, watched the approaching human forces with something approaching amusement. The humans had deployed their entire military strength, every ship and weapon they possessed, and still numbered barely a tenth of his advance force. Their vessels moved with determination but lacked the graceful power of true warships. This would be over within the hour. The first surprise came when the human ships opened fire at impossible range. The Dominion had expected close combat, the desperate charge of a cornered animal. But the humans struck from distances that should have made accurate targeting impossible. Their kinetic rounds moved at incredible velocities, guided by primitive but effective computer systems that adjusted for every variable in real time. Prime Executor's flagship shuddered as a railgun projectile punched through its outer armor. The damage was minimal, but the fact that it had penetrated at all was disturbing. More projectiles followed, a coordinated barrage from dozens of human ships working in perfect synchronization. The humans were fighting like a single organism, each ship supporting the others with tactical precision. But the real shock came when the first Dominion vessel was destroyed. The human ship responsible was tiny compared to the enemy dreadnought, barely the size of a Dominion escort. But it had somehow gotten close enough to detonate a massive nuclear device directly against the larger ship's hull. The explosion tore through layers of advanced armor and shielding, creating a chain reaction that split the dreadnought in half. The human ship was destroyed in the blast, and its crew had known that would happen. They had chosen to die, taking their enemy with them, something the Dominion had never encountered before. In their experience, species fought to survive, not to inflict maximum damage while dying. The tactical implications were troubling. More. Human ships began ramming attacks, their crews broadcasting final messages to their families as they drove their vessels into enemy hulls. The communications channels filled with voices saying goodbye, but none asking for mercy. Some ships detonated their engines in kamikaze runs. Others used their last moments to transmit targeting data to surviving vessels. The humans were weaponizing their own deaths. The battle moved to Earth's inner system, where the humans had prepared defensive positions unlike anything the Dominion had seen. Automated weapons platforms hung in orbital formations, their simple but effective guns creating killing fields around key positions. When Dominion forces destroyed these platforms, they found each one was rigged with explosives that turned the wreckage into deadly shrapnel clouds. Earth's moon had been converted into a fortress, its deep tunnels honeycombed the satellite, filled with missile launchers and railguns that could strike targets across the solar system. The humans had spent decades turning their entire home system into a weapon. Every asteroid mined for materials, every space station equipped for war. They had prepared for this battle long before the Dominion arrived. The space elevator was humanity's greatest engineering achievement, a carbon nanotube structure stretching from Earth's surface to orbit. When Dominion forces moved to capture it, they found it defended by humans who fought with desperate courage. Commander Lisa Park led the defense from the orbital platform, coordinating attacks from positions throughout the elevator's length. The battle for the elevator lasted 6 hours. Human defenders used the structure itself as a weapon, cutting support cables to bring sections crashing down on enemy ships. When the Dominion finally broke through the outer defenses, they found the humans had rigged the entire structure with fusion charges. Commander? Park broadcast on all frequencies as she prepared to trigger the explosives. "This is for Admiral Ross," she said, her voice steady, despite the plasma fire burning around her position. "This is for Earth. This is for freedom." The explosion that followed sent debris raining down on the Dominion fleet, turning humanity's greatest achievement into their greatest weapon. The battle moved to Earth's surface, where the Dominion found cities that had been converted to fortresses. Every building was a strong point, every street a kill zone. The humans fought from underground tunnels, from rooftops, from positions that should have been impossible to defend. They used their knowledge of the terrain to set traps and ambushes that cost the Dominion forces heavily in the ruins of New York. A small group of human soldiers held a subway station for 3 days against overwhelming odds. They had no heavy weapons, no air support, just rifles and explosives and an absolute refusal to retreat. When the position finally fell, the Dominion forces found messages carved into the walls. "Remember us. Freedom or death, humanity endures." The pattern repeated across the planet. Humans dying rather than surrendering, but making each death cost the enemy dearly. They fought with weapons that were primitive but effective, tactics that were simple but brilliant, and a determination that the Dominion could not understand. They seemed to view death in battle as preferable to life in chains. Admiral Ross made his final stand aboard his flagship as Dominion boarding parties fought their way to the bridge. His crew had been offered the chance to surrender, to live as prisoners rather than die as free humans. None had accepted. They fought hand to hand in the corridors of their ship, using emergency axes and plasma cutters. When their guns ran dry, the bridge doors finally gave way after hours of fighting. Dominion soldiers poured in, expecting to find the human commander, cowering or begging for mercy. Instead, they found Admiral Ross standing calmly at his command station, his hand resting on a red switch marked in human writing they could not read. "You have fought well," the Dominion squad leader said through its translator. "Surrender now, and your death will be quick. Your species has shown courage. That will be remembered." Admiral Ross smiled, an expression that showed both sadness and pride. "We don't surrender," he said simply. "We never surrender." He pressed the switch, and the flagship's fusion reactor overloaded, taking the ship and everything around it into nuclear fire. The news of humanity's resistance spread across the galaxy through secret channels and hidden communications networks. The enslaved species had been monitoring the battle, watching as the humans fought with a fury that reminded them of their own forgotten courage. They saw cities burn rather than surrender, saw humans choose death over slavery, saw a species that would rather cease to exist than live on their knees. On Avian Prime, young warriors gathered in secret to discuss what they had witnessed. On Korath, old soldiers began to remember what it felt like to fight for something greater than survival. The crystal minds of Lumina processed the battle data and reached a startling conclusion. The humans had known they would lose. They'd fought anyway. They had chosen to make a statement rather than make a bargain. The Dominion had won the battle for Earth, but the victory felt hollow. They had conquered a burned and broken world, populated by the ashes of a species that had refused. To kneel, their perfect record of submission was broken, their image of invincibility cracked. For the first time in their long history, they had been forced to destroy rather than simply conquer. Most troubling of all, they had learned that some species would choose extinction over servitude. The implications were staggering. If the humans could inspire such courage, if their example could spread to other worlds, the Dominion's empire of fear might begin to crumble. The galaxy had seen what defiance looked like, and some might decide it was worth the price. The embers of resistance began to glow in the darkness of galactic slavery, sparked by the fire of human courage that had burned so brightly before dying out. The galaxy had watched Earth burn, but the flames had spread farther than the Dominion realized. In the crystal cities of Avian Prime, young warriors gathered in hidden chambers deep beneath the orbital platforms. They called themselves the Wind, riders named after the ancient legends of their people. They spoke in whispers about the humans who had chosen death over surrender. Talon was barely 20 cycles old, too young to remember the days before the Dominion came. His generation had grown up knowing only servitude, taught that resistance was impossible and rebellion was madness. But the images from Earth had changed something inside him. He had watched human pilots ram their ships into Dominion vessels, seen soldiers fight to the death in bombed-out cities, witnessed an entire species choose extinction rather than slavery. They knew they would lose, Talon said to his companions as they met in the abandoned maintenance tunnels. The humans knew from the beginning that they could not win, but they fought anyway. Why would they do that? His friend Gale, whose father had been a pilot before the surrender, answered in a voice filled with wonder. Because they believed some things were worth dying for, because they thought freedom was more important than life itself. I never understood that before, but now, I think I do. The group consisted of young Avirans from across the city, all born after the conquest, but all carrying the genetic memory of flight and freedom. They'd been raised to serve in the Dominion factories, building ships and weapons for their masters, but the human example had awakened something their parents thought was dead forever. They began to remember what it meant to be warriors. On the industrial world of Korath, similar meetings were taking place in the deep mining tunnels, where the reptilian people labored under Dominion overseers. The Koraths had once been the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, their armies conquering system after system in the name of their war god. But even they had knelt when the Dominion came. Choosing survival over their warrior code, General Grimm was old enough to remember the conquest. He had been young then, a junior officer in the Korath military. He had watched his superiors surrender without firing a shot. The shame of that moment had burned in his heart for decades, but he had learned to live with it, as all his people had until now. The humans showed us something we had forgotten, he told the small group of veterans who met in the abandoned weapon caches beneath the capital city. They showed us that honor is not about winning or losing. It is about choosing to fight for what is right, even when victory is impossible. The weapons were still there, hidden in the deep vaults, where the Dominion forces had never bothered to look. Pulse rifles, plasma cannons, the tools of war that had once made the Koraths feared across the galaxy. General Grimm ran his clod, hands over a battle axe, feeling the weight of it, remembering what it meant to be a warrior instead of a slave. The crystal beings of Lumina were perhaps the most affected by the human sacrifice. Their vast computational minds had analyzed every aspect of the battle for Earth, calculating probabilities and outcomes with perfect precision. The mathematical certainty of human defeat had been absolute, yet the humans had fought anyway. This paradox fascinated the crystal minds and led them to a conclusion that changed everything. The entity known as Prime Calculator had been processing the battle data for weeks. Equations. Other lumina gathered around it in the great computational chamber, their forms flickering with shared calculations and theories. They had once been the greatest scientists in the galaxy, but the Dominion had reduced them to simple data processors and record keepers. The humans made an illogical choice. Prime Calculator finally announced, its voice resonating through the crystal matrix. They chose certain death over probable survival. By all mathematical models, this was the worst possible decision. Yet somehow, it was also the most powerful. They have done something we thought was impossible. They have changed the fundamental equation of galactic politics. The other lumina pulsed with understanding. For the first time since their surrender, they began to calculate possibilities beyond mere survival. They began to compute the odds of successful rebellion, the probability of freedom, the mathematics of hope. The numbers were encouraging. Captain Maria Torres had survived the battle for Earth by pure chance. Her ship had been damaged in the first engagement and forced to retreat to the outer system, where she had watched helplessly as her world burned. Now she drifted in the darkness beyond Pluto. Her small crew of survivors, the last free humans in the galaxy, they should have felt defeated, but instead they felt determined. "We need to contact the others," Torres told her communications officer. "The Avirans, the Koriths, anyone who might be willing to fight. The humans are gone, but the idea of resistance lives on. But we need to fan those flames." But her ship was small and fast, designed for reconnaissance rather than battle. It was equipped with advanced communication systems and stealth technology that might allow it to slip past Dominion patrols. Torres had a plan that was probably insane, but the humans had already proven that insane plans could work if you were willing to pay the price. The first contact came from Avian Prime. The signal was weak and heavily encrypted, but Torres' crew managed to decode it. The message was simple: Wind Riders ready to fly. Send coordinates for supply drop. It was followed by technical specifications for Aviran ships and a list of potential targets in their system. More messages followed from other worlds. The Koriths had weapons hidden and veterans ready to use them. The Lumina had calculated weak points in Dominion defenses and identified supply lines that could be disrupted. Species that had been silent for generations were suddenly talking about war. Torres established communication protocols and began coordinating the scattered resistance movements. The humans had developed tactics during their long preparation for war, strategies that could be adapted by other species. She shared everything freely, holding nothing back. The human military doctrine was simple: make the enemy pay for every victory. Never surrender. And always remember that freedom is worth any sacrifice. The first coordinated strike came 6 months after Earth's fall. On 17 different worlds, resistance cells struck simultaneously at Dominion supply depots, communication centers, and administrative buildings. The attacks were small but perfectly timed, causing maximum disruption with minimal resources. The galaxy learned that the spirit of resistance was not dead. The Avirans used their natural flight abilities to strike from the air, dropping explosives on ground targets before disappearing into the clouds. The Koriths fought with their traditional weapons, proving that plasma rifles and war axes could still be effective against modern armor. The Lumina coordinated the attacks with perfect timing, ensuring that Dominion forces could not respond quickly enough to prevent the strikes. The rebellion was small at first, just scattered cells of fighters who met in secret and struck at isolated targets. But each successful attack inspired others, and each victory proved that the Dominion could be hurt. The example of the humans had shown that resistance was possible. Now the galaxy was learning that resistance could be effective. The Dominion responded with brutal efficiency, cracking down on any world that showed signs of rebellion. They increased patrols, imposed martial law, and executed suspected rebels without trial. But their very brutality only proved what the humans had known all along: that the Dominion ruled through fear. And once that fear was broken, their power began to crumble. In the hidden bases and secret meeting places, the rebels began to organize. They studied human tactical manuals, translated into their own languages, practiced guerrilla warfare techniques, and planned increasingly bold operations. The ghost of humanity haunted the galaxy, inspiring courage in species that had forgotten what it meant to be free. General Grimm led a raid on a Dominion armory, recovering enough weapons to equip a full battalion of Korath warriors. Talon and his Windriders hijacked a supply convoy, distributing the stolen goods to resistance cells across 3 systems. Prime Calculator coordinated intelligence gathering across dozens of worlds, building a picture of Dominion weaknesses that could be exploited. Captain Torres watched from the shadows as the rebellion grew. Her small ship moved from system to system, carrying messages and supplies, coordinating attacks and training new fighters. She was the last human in the galaxy, but she was not alone. The spirit of her species lived on in every rebel who chose to fight rather than kneel. The Dominion had thought they were putting down isolated uprisings, but they were actually facing the birth of a galactic revolution. The humans had planted a seed when they chose to fight, and that seed was growing into something that would shake the foundations of the Empire. The galaxy was remembering what it meant to be free, and the memory was spreading like wildfire through the darkness of space. The rebellion that had started as whispers and hidden chambers now roared across the galaxy like a storm. What the Dominion had dismissed as isolated terrorist attacks had grown into coordinated military campaigns spanning dozens of star systems. The spark that humanity had lit with their sacrifice was now a blazing fire that threatened to consume the Empire itself. General Parks stood in the command center of the hidden asteroid base that served as the rebellion's headquarters. She was the daughter of Commander Lisa Park, who had died destroying the space elevator. And she carried her mother's determination along with her tactical genius. Around her, representatives from 20 different species worked together, planning operations that would have been impossible just years before. The base itself was a marvel of cooperation. Averan engineers had designed the atmospheric systems. Using their mastery of air currents and pressure dynamics, Korath warriors had carved the defensive tunnels using their natural strength and knowledge of underground warfare. Lumina crystal mines provided computational power that coordinated activities across light years of space. Other species contributed their own unique abilities to the common cause. The supply convoy from Sector 7 is 3 days behind schedule, reported Wing Commander Swift, an Averan whose feathers bore the scars of a dozen battles. Our scouts indicate heavy Dominion patrols along the normal routes. They're learning to predict our movements. General Parks studied the holographic display that showed troop movements across the local cluster. The rebellion had grown faster than anyone had expected, but success brought new challenges. The Dominion was no longer treating them as a minor annoyance. Full battle fleets were being deployed to crush the uprising, and the rebels were being forced to fight pitched battles instead of hit-and-run raids. Then we changed tactics, Park decided. Captain Torres, what's the status of the new alliance? Fleet, Captain Torres, now Admiral Torres, of the Free Galaxy Navy, activated another display. She had aged in the years since Earth's fall, her hair now gray and her face lined with the weight of command. But her eyes still burned with the same determination that had driven humanity to fight. We have 47 ships of the line, including the new Korath dreadnoughts and the Averan fast attack craft. The Lumina have provided targeting computers that can coordinate fleet actions across impossible distances. The fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each ship was designed using the best technology from multiple species, combining human tactical doctrine with alien engineering. The Averan ships were fast and maneuverable, perfect for hit-and-run attacks. The Korath vessels were heavily armored and armed, built for direct confrontation. The Lumina ships served as command and control platforms, their crystal mines processing battlefield data faster than any computer. But the most important ships in the fleet were the human-designed vessels. Built using plans that Captain Torres had saved from Earth's databases, these ships embodied the lessons humanity had learned during their final battle, that victory was less important than making the enemy pay for it, that every engagement should cost the Dominion more than they expected, and that no sacrifice was too great for freedom. The first major fleet engagement took place in the Nexus system, where 5 trade routes converged around a massive space station. The Dominion had reinforced the system with their 3rd battle fleet, expecting the rebels to avoid such a heavily defended target. Instead, the rebels struck with everything they had. Admiral Torres led the attack personally, commanding from the bridge of the ship she had named, Defiance in honor of Admiral Ross. The rebel fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, each ship knowing its role in the complex battle plan that had been rehearsed dozens of times. The Dominion forces were caught off guard, but they quickly moved to engage. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment the rebellion became a revolution. The Averan fighters swept through space like living things, their pilots, using instincts evolved for aerial combat to outmaneuver enemy missiles and gun batteries. The Korath ships charged directly into the enemy formation, their crews roaring ancient war songs as they fired everything they had at the Dominion vessels. The Lumina ships hung back from the main battle, their crystal minds calculating firing, solutions, and coordinating the fleet's movements with mathematical precision. They could predict enemy actions seconds before they happened, giving the rebels an almost supernatural advantage in combat. But it was the human-designed tactics that made the difference. Every rebel ship was equipped with ramming charges, fusion, devices that could be triggered if the vessel was about to be destroyed. The Dominion had learned to fear human suicide attacks during the battle for Earth, but they had not expected other species to adopt the same tactics. When the rebel ship Freedom's Price was crippled by enemy fire, its Korath captain did not hesitate to drive his ship into the nearest Dominion dreadnought, destroying both vessels in a ball of nuclear fire. The battle raged for 6 hours, but when it ended, the rebels controlled the Nexus system. More importantly, they had proven that they could defeat Dominion forces in open combat. The victory sent shockwaves across the galaxy, inspiring new uprisings on worlds that had been quiet for decades. The Dominion response was swift and brutal. They deployed their second fleet to retake the system, followed by ground forces that would ensure no rebels survived to inspire others. But when they arrived, they found the rebels had vanished, leaving only booby traps and propaganda broadcasts that taunted the Empire's forces. This became the pattern of the war. The rebels would strike hard and fast, winning spectacular victories that inspired others to join the cause, then disappear before the Dominion could bring their full strength to bear. They used the galaxy's size against their enemies, forcing the Empire to spread their forces thin, trying to protect thousands of potential targets. The rebellion's greatest weapon was not their ships or their courage, but their ability to inspire hope. Every victory, no matter how small, was broadcast across the galaxy through hidden communication networks. The enslaved populations learned that the Dominion could be beaten, that freedom was possible, and that other species were willing to fight and die for liberty. New resistance cells formed on dozens of worlds. The insect-like hive queens of the Rim systems began coordinating attacks using their natural telepathic abilities. The nomadic traders of the outer regions started smuggling weapons and supplies to rebel forces. Even the peaceful agricultural colonies began producing food and medical supplies for the rebellion. The Dominion found themselves fighting a war unlike any in their history. They were used to crushing organized resistance quickly through overwhelming force, but this enemy was everywhere and nowhere. The rebels had learned the most important lesson from humanity's sacrifice, that a small force willing to die for their beliefs could accomplish far more than a large force fighting only for survival. General Park stood in her command center watching reports flow in from across the galaxy. Successful raids on supply depots, liberation of prison camps, entire star systems declaring independence from Dominion rule. The rebellion had become something larger than anyone had imagined, a galactic movement that threatened the very foundation of the Empire. The Dominion is recalling ships from the outer territories, reported one of her intelligence officers, are consolidating their forces around their core worlds. It looks like they're preparing for a final defensive campaign. Park nodded, understanding the implications. The enemy was beginning to realize that they could not win this war through conventional means, or falling back to their strongest positions, preparing to make their last stand. Soon, the rebels would have to make a choice, accept a stalemate. That left much of the galaxy free, or push forward to complete victory at a cost that might destroy everything they had built. But Park already knew what choice they would make. The humans had taught the galaxy that some things were worth any sacrifice, and freedom was the most precious thing of all. The final battle was coming, and when it arrived, the rebels would be ready to pay whatever price was necessary to see the Dominion fall forever. The final battle began not with the clash of fleets, but with a message broadcast across the galaxy. The Dominion High Command, faced with rebellions on 1,000 worlds and their empire crumbling around them, made one last attempt to break the spirit of their enemies. They spoke from their ancient fortress world, their voices carrying the weight of millions of years of conquest and domination. Children of the galaxy, the message began, transmitted on every frequency and translated into every language. You have been deceived by the madness of a dead species. The humans chose extinction over wisdom, and now you follow their path to destruction. We offer you one final chance at redemption. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Continue this foolish rebellion, and we will reduce every world to ash. The response came not from any single leader, but from millions of voices across the galaxy. On Avian Prime, the Wind Riders took to the sky in formations that spelled out words of defiance. On Korath, ancient war drums echoed through the cities as entire populations prepared for battle. The crystal mines of Lumina pulsed with unified light, her calculations showing that freedom was worth any price. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of her flagship, surrounded by the largest fleet the galaxy had ever assembled. Ships from 50 different species had gathered in the darkness between stars, united by a common purpose that would have been impossible before humanity's sacrifice. Each vessel carried crews who had chosen to risk everything for the chance to live free. All ships report ready for hyperspace jump, announced her communications officer, a young Aviran whose grandfather had been among the first to surrender to the Dominion. The fleet stands at 1,200 vessels of all classes. Every major species is represented, and more ships are arriving every hour. Torres nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed the Dominion's final stronghold. The fortress world of Dominion Prime sat at the center of their empire, protected by defensive installations that had never been tested in battle. No enemy had ever come close to threatening the ancient world, but no enemy had ever been inspired. By the example of humanity's defiance, the fleet that surrounded Torres was a testament to what cooperation could achieve. Aviran fighters provided reconnaissance and air support with their unmatched speed and agility. Korath battleships served as the fleet's backbone, their heavy armor and weapons designed for direct confrontation. Lumina vessels coordinated the attack with computational precision that bordered on precognition. Dozens of other species contributed their own unique abilities to the common cause, but at the heart of the fleet were the ships built according to human design principles. These vessels embodied the lessons learned during Earth's final battle. That courage was more important than firepower, that sacrifice could achieve what strategy alone could not, and that the willingness to die for freedom was the most powerful weapon in the universe. The journey to Dominion Prime took the fleet through the heart of the enemy empire, past worlds that had been enslaved for millennia. As they traveled, more ships joined them. Entire planetary defense fleets abandoned their posts to join the rebellion. Supply vessels and merchant ships were hastily converted to fighting craft. Even civilian transports followed the fleet, their crews determined to witness the end of the empire that had oppressed the galaxy for so long. The Dominion threw everything they had at the advancing fleet. Battle groups that had been scattered across the galaxy were recalled to defend the homeworld. Ancient weapons that had not been used since the Empire's founding were activated and brought to bear. The enemy knew that if they lost this battle, their 1,000-year reign would be over forever. The first engagement took place in the outer system. Where Dominion patrol fleets tried to slow the rebel advance, the battle was fierce but brief, with the rebels using their numerical advantage and tactical coordination to overwhelm the defenders. The pattern that had defined the entire war continued. The rebels were willing to take casualties that would have broken other forces, because they were fighting for something worth dying for. General Park commanded the ground assault forces from her flagship, watching as dropships launched toward the fortress world's surface. The Dominion had turned their homeworld into a massive fortification, with cities that were actually weapons, platforms, and mountains that concealed planet killing, cannons. But the rebels had learned to fight in impossible conditions, and they brought that knowledge to bear against their ultimate enemy, the battle for dominion. Prime raged across space and on the planet's surface simultaneously. In orbit, the rebel fleet engaged defense platforms that had protected the world for millions of years. On the ground, Korath warriors charged through streets designed to channel and destroy invading forces, while Aviran fighters swept through the atmosphere, striking targets that ground forces could not reach. The Lumina had identified the key to victory, a massive control center deep beneath the planet's surface that coordinated all of the Dominion's defensive systems. If this facility could be destroyed, the ancient weapons would fall silent, and the fortress world would be vulnerable. But reaching it would require a sacrifice that even the rebels found daunting. "The tunnels are too well defended for a conventional assault," General Park reported to the fleet commanders. "We would need to punch through 50 levels of fortification, each one designed to stop exactly this kind of attack. So casualties would be enormous, and success is not guaranteed." Admiral Torres listened to the tactical briefing with the calm acceptance of someone who had already faced the worst the galaxy could offer. She had watched her homeworld burn, seen her species extinct, and spent years fighting an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. Now, at the moment of final victory, she was being asked to make the same choice that humanity had made years before. "How many ships would we need to sacrifice to punch through to the control center?" she asked her tactical officer. The Lumina crystal mine that served as the fleet's primary strategist pulsed with calculating light. The probability analysis indicates that a direct assault by 100 vessels, including ramming attacks on key defensive positions, would have a 73% chance of success. The casualty rate would approach 90% for the attacking force. A silence fell over the command bridge as the implications sank in. They were being asked to sacrifice thousands of lives for the chance to end the war. It was the same impossible choice that Admiral Ross had faced above Earth, the same decision that had cost humanity everything, but had inspired the galaxy to fight for freedom. Torres looked around the bridge at representatives from dozens of species, all of them waiting for her decision. They had followed her this far because she carried the memory of humanity's sacrifice and the determination to see it through to the end. Now she had to decide whether to ask others to make the same choice her people had made. "I'll lead the assault myself," she announced. "Any ship that wants to volunteer for the final attack can join me. But no one will be ordered to make this sacrifice. It has to be chosen freely, just like the humans chose to fight for Earth." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every ship in the fleet volunteered for the suicide mission. Captains who had been enemies before the rebellion, crews who had been slaves just years before, warriors from species that had never worked together, all united in their determination to end the Dominion forever. In the end, Torres had to turn volunteers away. The final assault force consisted of exactly 100 ships, representing every major species in the rebellion. Each vessel was equipped with ramming charges and crewed by volunteers who understood they were unlikely to survive the mission. But they also knew they were fighting to free not just their own worlds, the entire galaxy. The assault began with a coordinated strike by the entire rebel fleet, drawing the Dominion's attention to multiple targets across the planet's surface. Then Torres led her suicide squadron in a direct dive toward the planet's core, her ships punching through defensive lines that had never been breached in the Empire's history. The casualties were as terrible as predicted. Ship after ship was destroyed by the ancient weapons, their crews dying in nuclear fire as they pressed their attack. But each sacrifice brought the survivors closer to their target, and the Dominion's defenses were designed to stop conventional attacks, not enemies willing to die to achieve their goals. Torres's ship was among the last to reach the control center, its hull scarred by weapons fire and its crew reduced to a handful of survivors. As she prepared to ram the final barrier, she broadcast one last message to the galaxy, her words echoing those spoken by Admiral Ross years before. "This is for humanity," she said, her voice steady, despite the chaos around her. "This is for Earth, This is for everyone who chose to fight, rather than kneel. This is for freedom. The explosion that followed shattered the Dominion's control systems and opened the way for the final assault. With their ancient defenses failing, the Dominion's last stronghold crumbled quickly. Rebel forces poured through the breaches, fighting their way to the heart of the empire that had oppressed the galaxy for so long. The battle was fierce but brief, with the defenders finally overwhelmed by enemies who had learned that courage could overcome any obstacle. The Dominion High Command was found in their ancient throne room, surrounded by the treasures they had stolen from 1,000 conquered worlds. When the rebel forces broke down the doors, they expected to find their enemies cowering or begging for mercy. Instead, they found beings who seemed genuinely puzzled by their defeat. "We do not understand," the Prime Dominion said as General Park accepted their surrender. "We offered your species survival. We offered order and peace. Why did you choose chaos and death instead?" General Park looked at the ancient being that had ruled the galaxy for longer than most species had existed. Behind her stood representatives from every world that had joined the rebellion, united in a way that the Dominion had never been able to achieve through force and fear. "Because we learned something from the humans," she replied. "We learned that there are things more important than survival. We learned that freedom is worth any price, and that courage can be contagious. You ruled through fear, but they taught us that hope is stronger than fear, and that sometimes the smallest act of defiance can change everything." The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. The galaxy had to learn how to be free. After centuries of oppression, how to work together without the threat of a common enemy, how to build something new from the ashes of the old empire. It would not be easy, but they had learned the most important lesson of all from humanity's example. Sometimes choosing to fight when victory seems impossible is the most rational choice of all. Sometimes the willingness to sacrifice everything for an ideal can achieve what strategy and strength cannot. And sometimes the courage of a single species can inspire an entire galaxy to remember what freedom means. The humans were gone, but their legacy lived on in every world that had chosen to fight rather than surrender. In every species that had rediscovered its courage, and every being that understood that some things were worth dying for. The galaxy was free, and it would remain free as long as someone remembered the lesson that humanity had taught with their sacrifice: that freedom is not given by the powerful, but taken by the brave.